Chapter 4: The Crisis of Possession or Channeling. Adorcism. The possession phenomenon. The possession phenomenon is central in understanding the alternate reality of the Vaudoons, or their composite state with devotees. The Cartesian or logical approach of the Western world in facing the singularities of shadow matter entities and avoiding a medieval terminology uses expressions such as materialized psychisms or weightless thought, imaginal realm, and psychoid phenomena. Carl Jung, the eminent Swiss psychiatrist philosopher, incorporated this phenomenon into his archetypes, products of the collective unconscious. He sees them as visionary rumors, or of the order of religious visions. Young, 1959. Jack Valley, author of Passport to Magonia, and A Case Book of Alien Contact, recognize that those psychoid phenomena are not extraterrestrials and uses the euphemism of denizens of another reality. Fred Alan Wolf, author of Taking the Quantum Leap, uses imaginal realm and recognizes that psychoid phenomena exhibit a partial and temporal physical manifestation that does not fit the classical pattern, but rather that of quantum physics. The great discovery of Sigmund Freud, the unconscious, has become the new myth of the 20th century. We found exaggeration in its application, similar to that of the ancients, who explained all good and bad things by the works of spirits. However, it is imperative that we keep the unconscious in its proper place in order to recognize the other dimensions of reality. The eminent Haitian psychiatrist, historian, and sociologist J.C. Dorsainville, in Vaudou et Névrose, published in 1931 at Port-au-Prince, Haiti, expounded the Freudian concept of the unconscious and presented Vaudou as psychoneurosis. This is an important work. It is the first attempt to demonstrate that the Vaudou phenomenon is not supernatural, but is rather an expression of a hereditary nervous system disturbance that facilitates aberrant behavior. According to Dossenville, in essence, Vaudouism is a mental disorder, a religious, racial, hereditary psychosis manifested as split personality or multiple personalities with heightened sensory and motor capabilities, coupled with pythia- pythetic, prophetic abilities. In so doing, the author wants to discard the idea of other dimensions of reality. He is trying to reduce the whole universe to the physical chemical representations of the classical system. This is an a priori elimination of alternate realities, parallel universes, and the existence of a divine world. That makes him very comfortable in approaching the unexplained and eerie phenomena of the universe. That is, a scientific attitude that scrutinizes everything with faith in the ability of human minds to unravel the secrets of the universe. Dorsainville realizes that his hypothesis is only an approximation, and he expects advancements in the physical sciences to bring more light on our everyday reality. Like the author of the book of Genesis, the physician firmly believes that we are dust, and into dust we shall return. There is nothing beyond nature. However, modern science has shown us that dust is not as simple as we would like to see it. Dust has a dual nature. It is particle and wave. Many of the uncanny, eerie phenomena of nature fall into the realm of the wave function and into the world of that weird form of matter called dark matter and shadow matter, or invisible matter. When Dorsainville wrote his thesis on Vaudou in 1931, the tenets of quantum physics were not as popular as they are today. He did not mention anything about quantum mechanics. Bohr, Einstein, Heisenberg, and Schrödinger were still arguing about the implications of quantum principles and paradoxes. Freud's theory of subconscious self was the fashion of the day. And the temptation to study Vodou in the light of Freudian concepts was powerful and logical. However, Dorsainville goes further than Freud in his approach to the crisis of possession. The crisis is more than just a functional, dynamic disturbance. It is a genetic, hereditary nervous system disease. Additionally, it is an aberration of the nervous system that affects people of African descent. It can be atavic at times, that is, skipping one or two generations, or it can be directly transmitted from parents to children. This hypothesis does not fit the gestalt because the phenomenon is non existing in African Americans of the United States or Canada, who share the same genes with the African Haitians. Also, the phenomenon occurs in Caucasian individuals introduced into the cultural background of the Vaudoons, or the alternate reality of Haiti, Cuba, Brazil, and the like. It has been observed in Paris among Caucasian French assisting Vaudou ceremonies in a Haitian club. It is also a fact that not all individuals in a family of Vaudouists are affected by the phenomenon to the same extent. Some individuals never get possessed, others are simply made dizzy by the encounter, while others are repeatedly mounted by the Loa of Vaudoons. Dorsainville asked himself why there was no Vaudou possession in those of Black American ethnicity. His answer was that the phenomenon assumes a different expression because neurosis takes many shapes. However, from a clinical standpoint, the signs and symptoms of a voodoo possession are distinctively characteristic of the phenomenon itself and cannot be confused with diseases of ordinary psychiatry. However, from a clinical standpoint, the sign and symptoms of a voodoo possession are distinctively characteristic of the phenomenon itself and cannot be confused with diseases of ordinary psychiatry. In establishing his hypothesis, Dorsainville also comes up with an enlarged definition of neurosis that includes epilepsy, grand mal seizures, petit mal, hysteria, the intellectually gifted and geniuses. That is very far fetched. Contemporary classification of psychiatric illness does not include all cases of seizure disorders and all individuals with very high Q or the gifted ones. It is really going too far to speak of racial neurosis or racial psychoneurosis. It is also a fact that medicine in this part, in this last part of the 20th century, has revealed to us has revealed to us a genetic or organic nature of some conditions that we used to see as purely functional, such as homosexuality. This is still debatable, although researchers have claimed the, the isolation of such a gene. Regrettably, the champions of eugenics use the concept of racial psychoneurosis to perpetuate ethnic cleansing, holocausts, and genocide. At any rate, in order to attain the objectivity of science, we must keep an open mind and seek the interplay of nature and nurture. The crisis of possession or Adorcism, as manifested in blacks and whites, suggests the existence of a biological predisposition, which is that of the mediums. A medium is a person who is endowed with psychic ability, either spontaneously or by training through yoga techniques or transcendental meditation. The teachings of the Eastern religions convey the idea that everyone has psychic abilities that could be heightened or developed with proper methods and spiritual enlightenment. In all cultures, nations, tribes, and families, women show greater psychic abilities than men. We all know of the proverbial sixth sense of the woman. In antiquity, women played an important role in religion as seers or prophetesses. The Latin Sibyl, the Egyptian prophetess at Thebes and Memphis, and the Vestale of ancient Rome are hallmarks of their clairvoyant abilities. In Haiti, more women are Hunsi Kanzo, that is wife of the Loa of Vodun. In that alternate reality, a man can also be a wife or spouse of an entity. Official marriage and wedding ceremonies are performed for the Loa and adepts, with contracts written on the model of the legal ones. In Haiti, there are as many Mambo as Hugan. Mambo are priestesses, Hugan are priests. Dorsainville has called attention to some similarities between the Voodoo Adorcism, crisis of possession, and the symptoms of somnambulism, hysteria, and hypnotism. Like all physicians know, many signs and symptoms are shared by different disease entities. Fever and chills are present in infectious disease, metabolic disease, physical trauma, and cancers. Not all chest pains means a heart attack. Not all headaches mean a brain tumor, and not all skinny bodies mean tuberculosis, AIDS, or anorexia nervosa. With every case presented to the doctor, he must proceed to a differential diagnosis to separate the look-alike in clinical presentations. Somnambulism or sleepwalking is a condition during which a partly awakened sleeper, performs various physical activities. Most of the individuals affected just sit up in bed or stand near the bed. Some walk around, and a very few accomplish more complicated actions. Somnambulism is more commonly seen among children than among adults. An individual is more likely to sleepwalk during periods of tension or worry. After awakening, most somnambules do not recall their activities. A sleepwalker can injure themselves by falling out a window or downstairs, or by walking into obstacles, fire, or water. So it is important for people around them to awaken them and protect them. During the crisis of possession, the adept or the hunsi behaves in a somnambulic manner and must be assisted at the induction of the possession by the devotees. There is a lot of similarity between the composite state of possession and the dream state. We will see that in greater detail later. Dorsey and Veal share the opinion of other contemporaries on the matter, such as Professor Reich, Osterreich of the University of Tübingen. He stated that from the physiological standpoint, the naturally occurring or provoked somnambulism presents numerous analogies with voodoo possession. In either case, the subconscious takes over automatically. The conscious self becomes dull, forgetful, and the individual executes well coordinated movements without any voluntary control. However, Osterreich speaks of the rang or constraining character of the possession phenomenon that can help in the differential diagnosis of the two conditions. Dorsey and Veal also equates the crisis of possession to a form of hypnosis that can be seen as provoked sleepwalking. In antiquity, hypnosis was related to ecstasy and hallucinations people experience during religious ceremonies. Individuals in a hypnotic trance were believed to have extraordinary powers that came from the gods. In ancient Egypt, the priests could induce a state similar to hypnosis in a ceremony called temple sleep. With the influence of Christianity, people came to believe that under hypnosis, the individual was controlled by the devil. Thus, the practice was associated with witchcraft and black magic. However, by the late 1700s, some scholars began to look at the phenomenon in another way. The concept of of a magnetic fluid released by the sun and stars that pervades all things on Earth led scholars to think that anything that interferes with the normal flow of that fluid would induce diseases. That concept was exploited by Franz Mesmer, 1734 to 1815, an Austrian physician who studied medicine in Vienna and practiced in Paris in 1778. He believed that the mysterious fluid that penetrates the body can be handled in such a way that it allows a person to have a powerful magnetic influence over another person. Mesmer called this fluid animal magnetism and claimed that with the use of magnetic wands, the fluid could be directed at will and the sick could be made healthy. Mesmer's followers were named mesmerists or magnetizers, and his sessions or seances created a sensation in Paris. In 1784, the Academy of Sciences and the Faculty of Medicine in Paris demanded an investigation of this practice. The commission included Antoine Lavoisier, the famous French chemist, and Benjamin Franklin, the United States ambassador to Paris at the time. The investigative body reported that there was no such thing as a magnetic fluid. However, It recommended that hypnotism be practiced by qualified persons or physicians. In that same year, Marquise de Puysegur, Puysegur, one of Mesmer's students, discovered the secret of hypnotic trance. James Braid, an English medical writer, conducted an organized investigation in hypnotism and pointed out that the trance state differed from natural sleep and suggested the possible existence of a double consciousness in individuals that can be considered as a forerunner of the subconscious exploited later by Sigmund Freud. It also reminded us of the African Semedo and our modern axionic clone. Jean-Martin Charcot established in Paris a clinic for nervous disorders at the Salpêtrière. Among his students were Alfred Binet and Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud's initial studies of the unconscious were done on hypnotized subjects. He's the first to map the double consciousness or the subconscious world of the mind. He taught that memories stored in the subconscious mind influence a person's mental life. Psychoanalysis brings those memories into consciousness. He felt dreams were a major key to the subconscious mind. He listed three main forces in person's life: the id, an instinctive force; the ego, an executive force that contacts the world of reality; and the superego or superior disciplinary force. His theory of exploring the subconscious has been applied to art and surrealist painting and to literature in the stream of consciousness style of writing, écriture automatique, cadavre exquis, of the surrealist poets such as André Breton, Support, and Paul Éluard. Babies are born with the id, as well as the genetic physical predisposition of the human species, a genetic information network or instincts. This is part of the quantum semedo complex. As the child grows and his nervous system matures, he apprehends the world more fully and develops his ego and superego through the information processing network of the visible and invisible body components. Andre Breton, in his exploration of the subconscious, has come to realize the presence of what he called the Great Transparence. His visit to Haiti in 1945 could have helped the development of that concept. The manifestation of the Great Transparence in the Hufo is a repeatable experience on a daily basis, like in a laboratory setting. While Breton opted for the existence of the shadow matter entities as separate forces that can modulate our own shadow component, Dorsainville discarded such a notion and presented the crisis of possession as a hereditary mental disorder, manifested as hysteria, somnambulism, and hypnosis. The unusual physical manifestations of possession are attributed to heightened power of the subconscious mind. It is like the disease state itself enhances the energy of the information processing network and translates wave function into tangible physical power, like in the actualization of Einstein's equation equals mc squared. The disease state creates a setting where energy is transformed into matter. It is a fact that under hypnosis, a new personality can be introduced into the subject by the magnetizer or hypnotist. How is this possible? This is more than power of suggestion, as the latter is directed at the conscious itself, at the conscious self. In hypnosis, the shadow matter component moves on the surface or forefront and takes command of the individual's nervous system. Like in dream states, the limitations of space-time do not exist. In dreams, the boundary constraints of ordinary reality are overrun by ubiquity, transmutation, metamorphosis, instantaneous propagation, teletransportation, levitation, contraction or expansion of time or space, telepathy, precognition, and retrocognition. Experience has shown that under hypnosis, the shadow matter self remained under the command of the hypnotist. People once thought that individuals under hypnosis could not commit undesirable acts, but researchers have proved that hypnotized persons will perform antisocial and even self destructive acts. Some persons are capable of hypnotizing themselves. Under hypnosis, an individual may see, hear, touch, or feel things that are not present, or he may not be able to see persons or objects that are in plain view. He may feel insects crawling over his skin and start scratching or try to brush them away. This reveals to us how the quantum dimension works. All sensation perception categories are apprehended or become conscious after transformation to energy, electromagnetic field, or others. These space-time events are stored in the visible and invisible matter components. They can be retrieved to produce hallucinations, dreams, and actual physical events, such as vasomotor changes, sweating, blushing, burns, anesthesia, paralysis, muscle rigidity, or a new personality. Musicians under hypnosis can create compositions in the manner of Chopin or Debussy, for example, if they are told that they are those composers. However, there are boundary constraints in those actualizations. We never try to place a hypnotized subject into a gas chamber or a crematory to see if he will come out alive. We never try to open fire on him with a machine gun or use him as a suicide bomber that would that will come out without a scratch. We never impale him with a spear or a sword. We never push him over a cliff into the chasm below to see them climb up with a smile. We never ask them to drink poison or chew glass without harm. We never ask them to transmute literally into a panther, a lion, a cobra, or become totally invisible. We never suggest to them to literally fly like Superman through the sky or to move objects from a distance, telekinesis. Did anybody ever try to ask an amputee under hypnosis to run a marathon or participate in the Olympics? Of course not. We know better. We don't fool around with such nonsense. However, those suggestions are not nonsensical in the alternate reality of the vaudoons. We will see that later in greater detail. Dorsainville depicts the manifestations of possession as a functional disturbance in the mind called hysteria. In, psych- in psychiatry, hysteria is the result of unconscious conflict between thoughts and emotions that the person is not aware of. The critical period for the onset of possession is puberty or between the ages of 10 to 16. However, possessions have been observed in children 6 or 8 years old. Wait, let me take that back. The, the critical period for the onset of possession is puberty or between the ages of 10 to 16. However, possession has been observed in children 6 or 8 years old. The possession presents itself as hysteria manifested like a minor form of epilepsy, an incomplete symptomatology described by the parents as being brushed by the lower. According to Dorsainville, when the subconscious takes over, it liberates within us forces that are stronger than ordinary forces, as they are universal or cosmic forces. Let me see, one second. Universal forces. However, I would like to pinpoint a problem with the latter statement. Here, the psychiatrist is not presenting the subconscious as an ordinary function of the nervous system or a simple result of psychophysical of physical, chemical, and energetic actions and reactions. He brings in a new concept, a universal force that medicine does not consider in developing the functional and anatomical and anatonic manifestations of diseases. Let's see. That universal force belongs to the Eastern philosophies or the alternate reality of the Vaudoons. Thus, neurosis or voodoo hysteria is the state issued from the liberation of the subconscious self, which then appears with all its strength to manifest a split in personality or multiple personalities. It is a crisis of possession of the individual by his subconscious self. The psychiatrist recognizes the existence of eerie phenomena in the voodoo possession, but he explains them by the strong emotivity that unleashes forces that are more intense than that of ordinary physiology. For him, this is an abnormal state that allows the manifestation of unknown psychic properties of the mind or of its wave function. There is nothing alien in possession, no surviving soul or lower, a separate entity. Furthermore, Dorsainville presents the cosmic force as external forces of the universe that are at play in all vital manifestations. This is not far from animism or vitalism, in that it is following the opinion of Dr. Labouré, who thinks that thought, mind, life, and intelligence are, are expressions of the universal forces, and he equates them to electromagnetic forces and light. From a clinical standpoint, Rosenville gives us the description of Vodou possession that is to remain classic. He uses the model of Professor Osterreich of the University of Tübingen, um, who describes three types of changes when the body of an individual is overtaken by a foreign entity. There are a new face, a new voice, and a new personality. Dorsainville describes four elements: a split in personality, the Vodou mask or change of face, voice alteration, and a new personality. Number four. The possessed speaks of himself in the third person. It is the entity that speaks through him. The syndrome suggests the presence of an alien personality or a succession of different personalities. Succession of different personalities, like the three faces of Eve. Each one has its body, build, and constitution. Helen Smith, the case described by Professor Osterreich, was incarnating Marie Antoinette, Queen of France, and Cagliostro, magician of the 18th century. Dorsainville establishes a parallelism between the onset of hysteria and that of Adorcism. In both, we have seizure-like manifestations. Seizure-like manifestations. Hysterical seizures can usually be distinguished from genuine seizures in the fact that the hysterical patients rarely injure themselves, bite their tongues, or lose their urine. They do not have the typical spastic phase and then the alternating contractions and relaxations phase of a seizure, but tend to show a dramatic flailing of the limbs. Consciousness is partially retained, and seizures hardly ever occur when the patient is alone. The EEG is normal. Other motor disturbances described in hysteria include abnormal movements, disturbed gaits, and paral- and paralyzes. There are also sensory disturbances, particularly blindness and deafness, developing dramatically at times of emotional distress. Loss of sensation over one side of the body is often described by the patient. The sensory losses do not conform to patterns of nerve distribution. The reflexes remain intact or unchanged in paralysis of the limbs. Convulsion of the entire body does not disturb consciousness. Blindness occurs without disturbance of pupillary reflex or rapid oscillation of eyeballs. The mute can phonate by coughing. The deaf speaks louder to be heard in noisy environments. It is very important to note that in the classical textbook descriptions of hysteria, we do not have the eerie phenomenon associated with possession. By definition, hysteria is a disturbance of behavior in which symptoms and signs of disease are reproduced more or less unconsciously for some personal advantage. By definition, hysteria is a disturbance of behavior in which symptoms and signs of diseases are reproduced more or less unconsciously for some personal advantage. In that sense, hysteria can be hard to distinguish from malingering. But the authentic malingerer, the pathological liar of the Munchausen syndrome, goes beyond hysteria in self mutilating behavior. Thus, the physician or the researcher is always confronted with difficult differential diagnosis. There exist certain medical conditions that are notoriously easily confused with hysteria because of their subtle clinical presentations, such as the first attack of multiple sclerosis. The weakness of the limbs in early phase of acute idiopathic polyneuritis, of Guillain-Barré syndrome, the swallowing difficulty of myasthenia gravis, the muscular weakness and periodic paralysis, the spastic posture and eyes movements of postencephalitic postencephalitic Parkinsonism, the pain of the of a spinal cord tumor, or the abdominal pain of acute intermittent porphyria. Thanks to Dawsonville's clinical acumen, we can add the voodoo crisis of possession. However, for us in this latter part of the 20th century, the two conditions are not identical. There exist only some resemblances and analogies between them. There are more similarities between voodoo possession and somnambulism or hypnosis. In those conditions, the interplay between our nervous system and that of our shadow matter component or an alien entity seems to be identical. Wait. In those conditions, the interplay between our nervous system and that of our shadow matter component or an alien entity seem to be identical. The eminent Haitian psychiatrist described the onset of possession as an epileptic-like seizure, but without the spastic phase. He sees only the cyclic phase of flailing movements. In true epilepsy, the movements are not disorganized or erratic. Thus, the flailing reminds him of hysteria. However, he could have missed a tonic phase, a state of rigidity or impassivity when the body of the individual is suddenly invaded or subjugated by an external force. The seizure like phase observed by the physician is the result of a struggle between the individual's nervous system and the invading force. This is called a borsal reaction by the Vodou initiates and testifies of the ill preparation or ignorance of the mounted adept. An individual who has received proper initiation through the laver tete or by Hunsikanzo education does not put up a struggle or resistance to the shadow matter entity. However, a seizure like event can take place in a Hunsikanzo when he or she is mounted by the brutal loa of Petropantheon or the Zandor group. Thus, in ordinary circumstances with a well trained adept, the crisis of possession occurs in a smooth fashion. Furthermore, hmm, Thus, in ordinary circumstances with a well trained adept, the crisis of possession occurs in a smooth fashion. Furthermore, a true grand mal seizure may occur in the composite state of channeling, when the dark matter entity penetrates forcefully the nervous system of the individual and elicits abnormal electrical current in the brain. Ostenreich and Dorsainville describe a new face in the possessed or dramatic change in the person's features. Dorsainville called it a voodoo mask. The individual's face assumes new contours and expressions, such as that of a panther in Agasu's case, or a snake for Dambala, or that of a dead person in the case of Vivi. At times, not only the face changes, but the whole person in the case of the old and decrepit Legba, the coquettish Erzuli Frida, the sleazy Gede Zaring Nin, the hieratic Baron Samedi, the bellicose Ogu Ferail, or Emperor Dessalines. Dorsainville has witnessed a Dambala possession that mimics the motion of a snake. A young woman possessed by the voodoo climbed a tree with the agility of a snake, moved from branch to branch without any hindrance, and stayed there for 2 days without any food. In the case of possession by a child loa, the adult behaves like a child, and in Dorsainville's estimation, these feats cannot be faked. As mentioned earlier, he attributes to the subconscious a physical or magnetic power that in ordinary circumstances is contained or restrained, as nuclear power is restrained in the atom. To unleash the nuclear power or the force of the subconscious, unusual events or circumstances must take place. In the case of voodoo or hysteria, eerie phenomena are produced when a strong emotivity unleashes forces that are more intense than that of ordinary physiology. However, true hysteria is more of a mimicry than abnormal physiology. In possession, we are dealing with other aspects of the physical world that we call alternate realities. The story of the Spanish ambassador's butler, reported by D'Ursainville, is a case in point. A febrile illness opened up by his subconscious programming in such a manner that he repeated word for word all conversations heard during that time. Wait, the story of the Spanish ambassador's butler, reported by D'Ursainville, is a case in point. A febrile illness opened up his subconscious programming in such a manner that he repeated word for word all conversations heard during that time. That makes him a perfect spy. However, when he got rid of the fever, he lost the ability to recount the conversation. Likewise, in Vodou composite state of Adorcism, young people began to speak in African dialects that they did not learn in Haiti. Wow. So far, the phenomenon can be seen as functional disturbances. However, D'Orsayville went farther in assessing the event as an expression of heredity or atavism. He wrongly assumed that the dialect is an expression of the genes. During the crisis of possession, the Loa reenacts the customs of their African tribal culture. A Congo Vodun exhibits the exuberance of the Congo culture. Likewise, for the choleric or fiery Arada, the rebellious Ibo, and the cruel Kanga. To us, these manifestations are more the result of a composite state than that of atavism, um, atavism. Is that how you say it? Atavism. They express the existence of an alien semedo, an axionic entity which is like an information diskette that takes over, overrides, and modulates the complex psychic world of the adept. The breakdown in personality structure described by D'Orsainville in his Freudian approach does occur. He states that possession occurs because of a lack of a strong cohesion of the ego. Hmm. The breakdown in personality structure described by D'Orsainville in his Freudian approach does occur. He states that possession occurs because of a lack of a strong cohesion of the ego, allowing the subconscious to produce a new personality. The psychiatrist thinks that social evolution, education, and lofty ethics will preclude the occurrence of possession. The psychiatrist thinks that social evolution, education, and lofty ethics will preclude the occurrence of possession and its neurosis. Haitian relatives prove the contrary. The educated and well-to-do elite belongs to that 95% of the population that believe in the forces of voodoo, alternate realities, and many of them are practicing voodooists. The breakdown in personality structure occurs not because of lack of education, but because of invasion perpetrated by an alien axionic entity. In Vaudou et Nevros, Dorsainville describes the hesitations in speech at the onset of the crisis, stuttering deep inspirations or aspirations that testify of the difficulty in controlling the Borisemedo Celido complex of the individual. But when the invader is in full control, eerie phenomena begin to happen without hindrance. A new physiology is apparent. The sense perceptions are modulated to higher power. Olfactory materialization are manifested as the audience can smell unusual odors or sudden bad breath. The possessed can handle incandescent iron bars and fiery red charcoal, walk with naked feet on a brazen furnace, chew pieces of glass without pain or bleeding, apply hot pepper or hot sauce on the eyes or genitals. The motor functions go beyond ordinary physiology. Muscular strength increases. There is exaggeration and flexion, extension, lateral bending, and contortions, such as a 180-degree turn of the head so that the face is looking at the back of the body. It is a familiar scene in Haiti when under possession. A young child, perhaps an 8-year-old girl, cannot be subdued by 4 or 5 strong men. Dorsainville also reported the dance of the Aïssoua in Alger, where amazing feats are performed, eyes coming out of their sockets down to the cheeks. The possessed pierce their own eyes with fine, long needles, open their belly with their weapons, exposing their viscera and intestines. In Haiti, an old woman with a sprained ankle, who was able to ambulate, without a cane suddenly, when mounted by Loa, began to dance like a 20-year-old girl. She performed like that throughout the whole night. The possessed can levitate, not only a few inches above the ground, but higher up, like at the top of a big tree. A Nigerian patient of mine has reported a similar case seen in his village back home in Africa. Cases of teletransportation are reported in Haiti, with a handkerchief spread over the sea or a river. Agoue's devotees claim to have been transported back to Africa. Nan Guinea. Mrs. MS, a young married woman from Haiti who lives in Washington, D.C., reports that at the age of 16, she was possessed by the Semitic entity of a dead person. The treatment consisted of flagellation, along with many other things. Her mother, who was assisting the event, could not stand the sight, but MS did not feel any of the whipping. Her ordeal began when she rejected the advances of a young man who reported the incident to his mother, who decided to destroy the teenage girl the old-fashioned way, dispelling a coughing spirit on her. MS began to waste away like a typical case of tuberculosis in Haiti. She was seen by a renowned pulmonary specialist in Port-au-Prince, who, on examining the first set of x-rays of the lungs, was surprised to see the extent of the disease. Both lungs, both lung fields were destroyed by cavitary lesions in a relatively short time. He repeated the x-ray to make sure that they belonged to the young patient. He saw the same findings. He then referred her to the sanitarium of Port-au-Prince. At the sanitarium, the TB specialist repeated the x-rays, but this time they had a different picture. Both lung fields were clear. There was no radiographic evidence of tuberculosis. In the first sets of x-rays, the Semitic entity had entered into strong interaction with the tripartite nature of the patient and produced physical evidence of lungs disease capable of detection by x-ray. In the sanitarium set of films, the Semitic entity was in its own ordinary WIMP state. Um, the girl was returned to her parents, who thus sought the help of a Hugan. Dorsenville also mentions in his work cases of Pythiatism or prophetism. The person in composite state with the lower is capable of telling the future, or revealing hidden secrets, or revealing the past, or being the portent of good omen or bad outcome. Clinical hysteria, in its classical presentation, cannot manifest such paranormal feats, considering that the Freudian subconscious is only one aspect of the world of psychotronics. Many other psychiatrists nurtured in the alternate reality of Haiti reject Dorsenville's hypothesis. Dr. Lamarck Douillon, in his phenomenologic study of the crisis of possession, concluded that it is not a pathological condition. According to Dr. Jean Philippe, the spirits of the dead and magical spells are so often considered by the Haitians to explain all illnesses that it becomes imperative to pay attention to their mentality in the etiology of mental disorders. Certain aspects of their alternate reality create a state of anxiety that can lead to psychosis in predisposed individuals. Furthermore, the exigencies of the law or the pressing needs of the dead constitute tyranny on the adept. There are so many taboos and interdictions that the devotee spends a large part of his time in performing rituals to protect himself and his family. Dr. Legrand Bijou rejects Dawsonville's hypothesis that the crisis of possession is a pathological phenomenon. Also, physicians like Jean Price Mars or Louis Mars and Louis Maximilian have seen in Adorcism a cultural phenomenon that, in the cultural context, has nothing of a pathological nature. Jean Price Mars dwells mainly on the mystical aspect of voodoo. Louis Mars stresses the social, gregarious, and frenzied aspect of the crisis, while Louis Maximilian considers the psychological impact of the ambience and the physiological changes brought about by alcohol or other psychedelic beverages on the suggestibility of the voodooists. Dr. Legrand Bijou questioned, however, the supernatural explanation of the crisis of possession and its psychotronic feats, such as fire manipulation, glass chewing, or the increase in physical strength, endurance, and clairvoyance. What did he say? Considers the psychological impact of the ambience and the physiological changes. Okay, let's go back. He hopes that there is a scientific explanation for all this. He leans towards suggestion or autosuggestion as the mechanism at work, but the method of procedure remains a mystery. He senses that there must be a natural explanation coming from the natural sciences. We are in the same quandary when we must explain the transformations of the master force into electromagnetic waves, radio wave, infrared, X-ray, intra-atomic strong force, weak force, and axion of dark matter, the fermions and bosons of visible matter. For us in this later part of the 20th century, quantum physics and the supersymmetry theory, the string field theory, place us closer to a natural explanation by revealing the wondrous or marvelous aspects of our space-time. What we used to label supernatural or spiritual belong to the physical world of the supersymmetric universe or hyperspace. Mm. What we used to label supernatural or spiritual belong to the physical world of the supersymmetric universe or hyperspace. Kaku, 1994. Stanisio Kaku, fam. In rejecting Dorsey and Veal's hypothesis of hysteria, we do not negate his thesis as a whole, as the analogies between Adorcism and somnambulism or hypnosis are valid observations. Those three phenomena have a common infrastructure, which is that of sleep. In sleep, there is a reversal in dominance between the tripartite components of man, between the body, the semido, and the celido. In other words, there is a change of position between the visible physical body and the shadow matter physical body, or the axion or axionic clone. In ordinary waking state, the visible body is on top and takes precedence in dealing with the environment through its information processing network, IPN. In the sleep state, the clone moves on top and takes control. As the individual's ordinary conscious retreats in the background and slumps under the surface of normal spatio-temporal relation with the external world, the shadow matter component moves to the fore and begins its own interactions either within self or with the other components of the individual or with the external world. In sleep induction, the heaviness of the eyelids corresponds to the subjugation of the body and its IPN by the axionic double. In the first phase, known as slow wave sleep, SW, or on EEG, um, electroencephalogram, the IPN activity of the visible body is reflected in the gradual slowing of the EEG rhythms, with tall amplitude and synchronization through four stages from mild drowsiness to profound um, somnolence. Some dreams may occur during that phase, but they are all dull and prosaic and they are related to the individual's daily activities. That stage lasts 90 to 100 minutes. There is the release of some chemical in the brain to allow this reversal in spatio-temporal plane of existence, the passage from a parallel universe to the next. Serotonin released from the neurons of the RAF nuclei induces slow wave sleep and primes the second state of dream or REM. This may be related to a daily cyclic rhythm of wakefulness and sleepiness. One second. The second phase of sleep or REM state is characterized on EEG by low voltage or amplitude, fast and desynchronized waves, and is associated with profound relaxation of the skeletal muscles, absent reflexes, abrupt changes in respiration, pupil dilation, blood pressure, pulse rate, muscle twitching, and penile erection. Second phase of sleep. Okay. At this point, the double is in full control of the body and produces vivid dreams, colorful and uninhibited dreams. It is probably during that period that psychic events take place, such as premonitory visions, out of body travel, and other wave function paradoxes. REM sleep lasts about 15 to 20 minutes. After that, the individual returns to slow wave, SW, sleep. REM sleep gradually occurs more often during the night and, on the average, makes up about 25% of adult sleep time. The REM dreams are more imaginative and introspective and can explore all the forbidden dimensions of the universe. Night terrors are usually associated with stage 3 or 4 of the slow wave sleep. The person will suddenly awake with shortness of breath, palpitations, and nervousness. This seems to result from different interactions between the IPN of the double and that of the visible body, as the latter tries to come out from under the dominance of the double, or it may result from encounters with foreign or parasitic WIMPs, entities that roam the world. This creates the dreams hallucinations as the individual tries to come out of sleep or tries to throw away the empowerment of an alien entity. Nightmares are described in correlation with the REM sleep and seem less intense than night terrors. Narcolepsy is a sleep disorder that illustrates dramatically the interplay between the body and the semido. It is manifested as cataplexy, sleep paralysis, or dreams hallucinations. Cataplexy is a sudden loss or decrease of muscle tone that may be partial or generalized. It is an abrupt takeover by the individual's shadow double. It seizes the dominance without the slow progression of the SW sleep. This is probably the result of an abnormality in the chemical system responsible for the waking state or cortical arousal, namely the catecholamine and acetylcholine located in locus ceruleus and locus subceruleus nuclei of the brain. Sleep paralysis is different in the sense that it occurs while the individual is already asleep, falling asleep or coming out of sleep. Also, there are different degrees of sleep paralysis. Hip, hypnagogic or hypnopompic hallucinations are vivid visual and audio and auditory dreamlike states that occur while going into sleep or while being aroused. But slow wave and REM systems are involved in narcolepsy. Somnambulism or sleepwalking in somnambulism or sleepwalking is associated with stages 3 or 4 of slow wave sleep. It is manifested as an aimless wandering, usually without falls. It is a composite state, a paradoxical situation in which the physical, visible body overcomes the hypotonicity of sleep. Although slow wave sleep is less hypotonic than REM, but the impulse to stand up and walk comes from the shadow clone or double. It is like self possession or possession by one's own semido. Thus, in dreams, hypnosis, somnambulism, and night terrors, we seem to be dealing with a dominant or runaway Semitic component. Dr. Bijou, in Psychiatrie Simplifiée, underscores the analogies between possession and hypnotism. He mentions the fact that in time past before the 18th century, hypnotism was considered a manifestation of occult supernatural power. With, but with the advances in medical knowledge, the subject has been demystified and is now taught in medical school along with natural sciences. He hopes the same will occur with the alternate reality of Vodou. A subject under hypnosis can manipulate fire without any sign of burns. A, lapar- a, lapar- a, lap- a laparotomy, opening of the belly, can be performed in a painless manner. A hemorrhage can be stopped without medical surgical techniques. Second degree burns can be produced by stating to the individual that he is in contact with a very hot object. The hypnotist can create the appearance of a cadaver by suggesting to the subject that he's a dead person. When it comes to the ESP phenomenon observed in Vodou trance, Bijou thinks that a great power of intuition is at work, particularly in clairvoyance. He sees a connection between the psychotronic feats of Vodou trance and those developed by yoga techniques. However, what the yogi or the adepts of Eastern religion see as a manifestation of the supernatural or the astral or spiritual body of the individual, Bijou is trying to see as power of intuition. Bijou does not accept the existence of occultism or sorcery. For him, sorcery is only a ploy or shenanigan used by the Hugan or the seers to conceal the use of natural procedures in order to hold sway and power over the members of the society. This is an oversimplified approach to a complex universe in which we are relentlessly discovering new dimensions decade after decade. The evidence or existence of dark matter, WIMPs, with properties therefore heretofore assigned to ghosts or spirits, opens new vistas for the researchers and brings to us a new paradox, that of the physical nature of some aspect of our spiritual dimension. But this is a new concept of physical nature derived from quantum physics and its attendant new metaphysics. The crisis of possession in itself is a reversal in the structure of the tripartite composition of man. The IPN of the body and and soul of the individual is overtaken by a foreign entity. The mechanism is similar to that of dreams in the sense that the awareness system of the person retreat, sink below the surface, leaving the leading role to the invading entity. In dreams, the individual's own double takes control, whereas in possession or adorcism, the foreign invading force overwhelms the identity of the devotee or adept. Here we must re-emphasize that the Loa or Vodun is not a metaphysical entity in the old acceptance of the term. Metaphysics is no longer a view of the mind, a product of the imagination. Metaphysics and spirituality refer to a heretofore unknown aspect of the physical realm, the world of invisible matter, the universe of the WIMPs and axions. So far, the only exception to that new definition is the nature of God, Yahweh, who belongs to an entirely different dimension, that of eternity. Eternity is that dimension which has no beginning, no end, no change, and is inhabited by one person, the eternal God. It is the opposite of space time that has a beginning and will have an end. That end being the nature, being the return to its source, Yahweh, the essence of existence, the liberation from birth, death, rebirth, redeath, and the attainment of immortality in the heavenly paradise. And thus, everything in space-time or universe has a physical existence, be it energy, force, particles, fermions, bosons, axions, vodouns, loa, soul, spirits, atoms, molecules, inorganic matter, organic matter, organisms, plants, animals, or humans. All these entities can exist as visible or invisible physical substances, or have a dual nature, or exist in those planes at the same time, or translate from one state to another. The lower are referred to as as force by the Vodou pundits and the initiates. They are real, physical, invisible forces, having a dual nature, a wave particle nature, energy, and axion physical entities. Henceforth, the materialistic dreams of the scientists like Dorsainville and Bijou have finally come true. But that alternate reality is queerer than they can suppose, to repeat JBS Haldane, Possible Worlds 1945. The onset of a crisis of possession is associated with a physical contact, a force field that is at the same time a psychic field. This is the physical contact of the axionic entity. The person is being immersed and engulfed into a wave of energy. The contact is felt like that of a beam of light projected suddenly on your face with your eyes closed, or the heaviness of a heat wave one experiences in the hottest days of summer, or the paralyzing sensation of entering a very cold, freezing, sub zero temperature of the outdoors. Certain people describe it like a wind of water running upon skin. Others compare it to the sensation one experiences when holding a magnet in the vicinity of iron. That sensation is that of a physical attraction or pulling toward a certain direction. The magnet, in fact, attracts iron and certain other materials by virtue of a surrounding field of force produced by the motion of its atomic electrons and the alignment of its atoms. The invisible body of the Loa or Vodun exerts a similar attraction on the organism of the target person or persons in the assembly, as that attracting field can be experienced by more than one person at a time, the axionic body of the Loa being ubiquitous. That attraction can be resisted or blocked by certain individuals so that people would speak about different degrees of possession. Some are brushed by the force field, some are made briefly drunken, saule, and some are literally mounted, straddled, invaded in and out by the shadow of dark matter of the Vodun. In the crisis of possession, the close encounter with the force has that rang described by Osterreich or constraining character. There is a subjugating force that coerces the individual into submission in order to take control of the person's mind. When the invasion is completely established, the individual loses consciousness or enters a dream-like state. The individual is like a somnambulist or someone under hypnosis, but this time the reversal is in dominance is done in favor of a foreign shadow matter. From the superficial contact of the onset, the invader progresses to enter the body of the target person. The penetration is done either from head to toe or from toe to head. According to some parapsychologists, the invasion is done through the chakras or a person's aura. Those chakras are psychic centers distributed along the vertical axis of the body. There are seven major ones: base of spine, Muladhara, the sex organs, Svadhisthana, solar plexus, Manipura, the heart, Anahata, the throat, Vishuddha, the third eye located where the eyebrows meet, Ajna, and the crown center on top of the head, Sahasrara. Energies are received through those chakras or psychic centers of the Semedo and travel throughout it in an intermingling network of psychic channels, which were known by the ancient Hindus as nadis. In the Upanishads, it is stated that there are 72,000 of these channels, IPN, running throughout the astral body, Semedo, in a complex matrix of interconnecting channels that produce a balanced flow of energies. By invading the organism of an individual, the lower modulates the functioning of the nervous system, the somatic channels, the body as a whole, and the immediate surroundings of the person. The preferential portals of entry would be the nuchal area, the heads and the legs, and from there the body snatcher spreads to the entire organism. It can be stipulated that if the Curlian photography is applied to a possessed individual, dramatic changes can be observed throughout the layers of auras, which are a visual manifestation caused by the interactions between the dark matter um, or shadow matter of the individual and his ordinary visible matter. According to Alfred Metro, the invasion by the lower is perceived by some possessed as a blow to the back of the neck, the nuchal region, or a grabbing cramp in the same area that is felt like a bite. Others experience tingling sensations in the legs or a heaviness that rivets the limbs to the ground. That induction through the legs has been reported by Maya Deren, author of The Divine Horseman, in her own account of a close encounter with the Loa Erzuli. Alfred Metro stresses the repeatability of the experience that can be observed like an experiment in a laboratory setting, so that in the future, physician, wait, Alfred Metro stresses the repeatability of the experience that can be observed like an experiment in a laboratory setting, so that in the future, physicians and other scientists, physicists, and specialists in psychotronics, parapsychology can use EEG, Kirlian photography, and thermography, and other fancy gadgets of modern technology to study the composite or superposition state of the possessed with or without hypnosis. Following the shock of induction or invasion by the body, snatcher or lower, the individual loses consciousness or his ordinary spatio-temporal awareness. He is in a trance state. Some adepts or pundits of the Haitian alternate reality explain the composite state by a removal of the gros bon ange, semedo, from the body. The semedo has been chased away. This terminology is too strong in our opinion. The gros bon ange is not literally sent away. It is overshadowed by the axionic alien into a retreat in such a way that its IPN is not in command of the individual. The person's soul and body are governed by the Vodun in a superposition state that explains the struggle between the adept and the Vodun at the outset of possession. A struggle that creates the symptom, symptomology seen as hysteria by Dorsainville and others. Metro presents the clinical picture in the following manner. The possessed appears to have lost the control of their nervous system, particularly the motor aspect. They are shaken by spasmodic fits or convulsive seizures. Then they stand up and jerk forward as if repelled by a spring, make a sharp about face, then freeze for a moment with the trunk bent forward, stagger, totter, regain their equilibrium, then stagger again to finally enter in a subdued trance. Other variants of the symptom, other variants of the symptomatology are observed, such as absence or petit mal type, or a generalized tremor with shortness of breath and sweating. The face may have a painful expression. At times, the possession begins with stupor or somnolence, a typical sleep-induced phase. But soon, this is followed by a hypnotic type of behavior, often accompanied by some convulsive seizures. The modalities of the crisis reflect the individuality of the Vaudoons. The nefarious bellicose Loa invades the body with the violence or fury of a hurricane. The benevolent Vaudoons proceed through a smooth induction. The symptomatology uh, reflects also the degree of initiation of the adept. The rituals of lave tete or hunsikanzo prepare the devotees for such an encounter. The ill-prepared individual, or bossal, like a wild horse, fights the invasion tooth and nail. The gesticulations are an attempt to get rid of that encircling magnetic force that is trying to subjugate him. The well-prepared initiate goes through the superposition state without struggle or rebellion. The assembly also plays an important role in protecting the individual in this moment of trial. The assembly knows that this is not a masquerade, an imitation of a hysterical type or a Munchausen syndrome pathological lying. It takes steps to protect the possessed from serious injuries that his reactions can produce, and also watches to protect the modesty of the women. At the end of the trance state, the individual has no recollection of his actions or deeds except the early phase of attack. However, some people may recollect the ecstasy of a higher consciousness, something of a psychedelic nature, or similar to the experience of the seers. According to Mithot, the resistance to the induction of possession can be broken by the Hugan's intervention, who performs in front of the target person a dance while gazing in the manner of a hypnotist. Some regular trial or horses of the voodoo can block the entrance of the alien entity into their physical being by using some magical procedures to bind the lower or to keep him at a distance. This can be done with a special setting of the person's hair, or a special knot in a scarf, or by placing a piece of wax at one end of the scarf. The great transparents or invisible WIMPs that are the lower are naturalized by those simple physical chemical procedures. They are still present in the vicinity of the target person, but can only create a slight daze or dazzle, or short-lived state of ecstasy, described by Saule by the Haitians. Another way to block the subjugation by the voodoo is to remain seated with arms crossed on the chest and to keep a mean appearance. It is like saying, "Beat it, sucker," or "Bug off, bozo." Another way to block the subjugation by the voodoo is to remain seated with arms crossed on the chest and to keep a mean appearance. It is like saying, "Beat it, sucker," or "Bug off, bozo." Okay. Karen McCarthy Brown, the author of Mama Lola, describes the first experience of a young girl, Maggie, in a very vivid manner, giving us a step by step invasion of a visible body by the invisible shadow matter. Maggie's consciousness captures a process by which she sees herself becoming progressively invisible as Miss Invisible or the Invisible Woman. Progressively, the lower extremities fade away, then the arms, and then the entire body. At this point, the person loses consciousness and is completely dominated by the alien body. It is blackness or blackout. Maggie describes the invading force field as taking a shower and the thing just running down all over you. You feel like your feet are not touching the ground. Your head is heavy, like floating. Maggie was 10 years old when she had a first encounter with a Loa. Being a smart Alec in New York City where people keep constant vigilance, Maggie tried her best to fight off possession and the surrender inherent to the trance state. Even a full-blown initiate of the degree of Mambo or priestess such as Maggie's mother, Lourdes, still finds it necessary to ward off possession, as it can interfere with daily activities. Lourdes was bedazzled by an axionic spirit at the age of 13. It was the lower marionette that passed briefly through her head, but she sustained a full composite state at the age of 19. She reveals also that after the phase of induction, where the entity is moving through at her head, she feels very light, like a piece of paper. Therefore, you pass out, but the spirit came and he talks to people. But when the spirit is in your body, in your head, you don't know nothing. Even for an accomplished initiate like a Lourdes, the induction of possession is associated with a struggle, not the wild restiveness of a bozo, but of a bossal, but that of a physiological resistance of an immune system to a foreign body. Thus, a Lourdes knows what to do to ease the entrance of the Loa into her systems. She uses a steady gaze at a light by narrowing her eyes. Also, during rituals into the peristyle of the Humfo, the beats. Wait, where am I? During rituals into the peristyle of the Humfo, the beats and rhythms of the drums open up the channels for a swift invasion by the invisible voodoo. The narrowing of her eyes is also observed. Then her head flexes upon her chest as if a weight were on the back of her neck. Karen Brown mentions that the spirits are said to straddle on the back of the neck. This is a portal of entry corresponding probably to one of the important chakras of the astral body or Semedo. Then her face assumes the Vaudou mask of D'Orsainville. She often staggers and requires the support of the assembly. Soon the alien Semedo is in full control of body, speech, and voice. Karen Brown describes a slow induction of Adorcism in a Lourdes basement altar room. As she gazed at the light on the altar, a slight tremor waved through her body intermittently. Then she closed her eyes tightly and shook one hand vigorously, like to get rid of a numbness or paras, paresthesias, whatever. There is an analogy between her behavior and that of someone who is trying to resist somnolence by alternating wakefulness and sleepiness. From time to time, she emerges from below the surface of the waves of consciousness. The tremors follow a crescendo from barely perceptible to intense shaking. This should be recognized as a variant of seizures, unlike the typical spastic and cyclic phase of classical epilepsy. It should not be confused with the flailing of hysteria. With the cessation of tremor, Alludes stood up straight and directed keen black eyes at Karen Brown, the author. She was in full superposition state with Papa Ogu. As far as the induction and the full composite state of possession are concerned, nothing can surpass the testimony of a researcher who, during a field study, was herself possessed by a vaudou on many occasions, and gives us a first-hand account of the invasion of a body and soul by a dark matter entity. This is Maya Deren, the author of Divine Horsemen, The Living Gods of Haiti. She is Caucasian and of Russian ancestry. She went to Haiti in 1947 with the purpose of filming a documentary of Haitian dances, but ended up writing a book on the irrefutable reality and impact of Vodou mythology. She recorded as humbly and accurately as she could as a person of a different ethnicity, heredity, and culture, the logics of a reality that had forced her to recognize its integrity and to abandon her Western manipulations. As an artist, she was able to approach Haiti's alternate reality without that scientific detachment of of the professional anthropologist nurtured with the tenets of Galileo and his rationalist contemporaries for objective science that renders him a disinterested, non-participating observer hoping to uncover a reality free from the subjective creations of the human mind. She was one of those intellectual descendants spoken of by Robert Marsh in Physics for Poets, who were denying, like Andre Breton with his cohort of poets, that any such separation was possible. The quantum principle of complementarity was at work in Darren's intellectual approach. Bohr's principle of complementarity recognizes that there are multiple aspects of reality, and very often those aspects clash because of contrasting mental constructs in the appearance of reality that many splendid thing. The humanistic sciences and natural sciences are in fact compatible, and their conflict is only apparent. We are just dealing with a complex manifestation of the wave particle duality. Darren was invited to participate as an observer in a Vodou ceremony by a well known Hugan. She had gone her home, she had done her homework and understood what to expect from the Haitian alternate reality. She did not wish to be possessed, but to withdraw from attendance would be cowardice. She could resist the invasion of the shadow matter, but she must not flee or escape. That resistance comes from that reluctance to accept the loss of control, the loss of self or ego, to the benefit of an alien, Semedo. At one point during the ceremony, Darren decided to change places and to go toward her Haitian maid, who was also assisting the service lower. She took two steps, but to her surprise, her left foot was rooted suddenly, numbly, to the ground, pulling her forward. A bystander grasped her arm to prevent a fall and supported her firmly. Stunned, she froze momentarily in that posture. then tried to regain her balance and finally straightened out. She returned to her seat, still shaken by this abrupt brush with a loa. Darren classifies this attack as an aura of possession. One sec. Okay. Darren classifies this attack as an aura of possession, but it was more than an aura because as she sat down, there was an unpleasant lightness in her head as if the multiple structures and zones of the brain were being gently disconnected, and its integrating function of or network coordination was being imperceptibly dispersed. That disruption in its IPN created little spaces of emptiness or subtle thinning out of consciousness. She needed some fresh air, so she left the peristyle for a moment and went outside to smoke a cigarette. On leaving the place, she noticed a transformation in her brain. The little spaces or emptiness were evaporating, allowing the brain to regain its unified integration, becoming solid once more. On returning into the home fort, she realized that the Hugan Isnard was possessed by the Voodoo Ogun. This was to be followed by other persons in the assembly falling prey to the ubiquitous nature of the Loa. A handshake with the left or a pirouette in reverse can break the brain barrier and open the door to possession. Also, the vibrations of the drum beats can create in the person a receptive state, probably by distorting the molecular or atomic structure of the organism, leaving more empty spaces to the avidity of the shadow matter entity. During a break of the mama drum, a man standing on the sidelines, a few yards from Darren, keeled over backward as if struck by a blow. This is a surprise attack by the lower, who can come on without warning. The bystanders caught the man in time to prevent a fall. After a spastic phase, the body jerked violently. He stood up and sprang forward into the dance floor of the whole four. In the process, he bumped into a woman. That contact triggered a possession in the latter. She froze first on one leg and then staggered abruptly into the tempo of the drums. The shadow matter entity, in a fractal manner, reproduces its characteristics in every possessed individual. After the departure of Ogun and a moment of rest, the chorus of Hunsis and the drums sang Voodoo Erzuli's song, raising a tidal wave of sound and surfing motion. Darren joined that flow of Yanvalu rhythm and rode forward on that surf of sound with great delight. Soon the muscles of her calves and thighs became tired and she was tempted to stop. She decided to hold on in spite of the fact that the air was becoming heavy and humid. She was gasping for air, and she could feel the pulsations of her heart beating at her temples. Her legs became very heavy, and the muscles were tender and spastic. But suddenly, she became aware of a change. The painful state was gone, and she was moving effortlessly, as if it was done through another dimension. With the pain gone, she realized that she could focus at leisure on the splendor of the drum beats to the sylphide motion of her limbs. It was like an out of body experience, one in which she could observe herself like in a dream or in a mirror. She was in a magic kingdom of quantum land. She was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. She wrote, I realize that it is no longer myself who I watch, yet it is myself. We two are made one again, joined by and upon the point of the left leg, which is as rooted to the earth. Here, the portal of entry of Azuli into the organism of Deren is that left leg, that limb mentioned also by Metro and Magi of Lola, as she started becoming the invisible woman from the legs up. Darren was experiencing that magnetic sensation, that strong pull created by a magnet in proximity of iron or metals, manifestation of the physical presence of invisible matter, of the axionic vodun. That force coming from the ground or from a subterranean pool or realm was moving up outside and deep inside that leg in a manner of blood. Wait, let me go back. That force coming from the ground or from the subterranean pool or realm was moving up outside and deep inside that leg in a manner of blood circulation. That strange numbness described by Darren is a variant of the sensation created by an anti-gravity pull that can lift the person above ground into the air or isolate her flesh against the ravage of fire, or rivet her to the ground in a paradoxical manner. This is a way to express the feeling of being engulfed into the force field or axionic field that from WIMPs has become strongly interacting massive particles. SIMPs. In Adorcism, at the level of simple crisis of possession, the WIMPs remain invisible, non detectable by electromagnetic means, but they exhibit their force of gravity. That proprietary, oh, that property that has allowed astronomers to detect the presence of dark or shadow matter in the universe. And we should remember that shadow matter constitutes 86% of the total mass of the universe. Here, the principle of complementarity or duality is manifested in the two states of WIMPs and SIMPs, like the particle and wave function paradox. In ordinary circumstances, the voodoo WIMPs do not disturb our atoms or molecular structures. They go through us like radio wave or X ray. But in possession, they make themselves manifest in a tangible manner and enter into composite or superposition state with our ordinary matter. How is this accomplished? We do not know the details yet, but the analogy of the wave particle duality can help us fathom that weird reality. The principle of correspondence is also at play in Adorcism when two sets of laws, Newtonian and quantum, correspond or overlap. As far as we know, there exists no Curlian photography of a person possessed by a Loa. That should be part of future research studies in psychotronics. The photography is not the picture of shadow clone itself. It is the picture of the aura, which is a resultant phenomenon from the interactions between the WIMPs and the visible body. The aura is visible because it falls into the category of substances detectable by electromagnetic infrared means and the like. As the force field moving up from the leg invaded her whole body, Darren let herself go. It was at that point she experienced again what we would call a supersymmetric duality. She saw herself as double, two parallel selves like in a mirror. One of her parallel selves was watching the other, and soon the vision of the watcher began to flicker, leaving gaps of invisibility that were getting wider and greater. The other self was a dancing one, and it was changing places after each gap. The gaps were like moments of unconsciousness. This was like alternating between wakefulness and sleepiness, and it felt like she was going to get lost in an empty space. Altogether lost in a dead space and a dead time. The repetitive, pompous, martial, cavalcading beats of the drum led to elation and exhaustion, so that the vigilance of the adept is put to rest. The psychic brain barrier is dissolved, leaving the individual wide open for an invasion of the body. Let me go back. Where do I go back? The other self, I'll start from here. The other self was a dancing one, and it was changing places after each gap. The gaps were like moments of unconsciousness. This was like alternating between wakefulness and sleepiness, and it felt like she was going to get lost in an empty space, altogether lost in a dead space and a dead time. The repetitive, pompous, martial, Calvasating, calvasating beats of the drum led to elation and exhaustion, so that the vigilance of the adept is put to rest. The psychic brain barrier is dissolved, leaving the individual wide open. The psychic brain barrier is dissolved, leaving the individual wide open for an invasion of his body and inner self. The shield remains lowered even in the bleaks, even in the breaks period, rending the adept or the guest rendering. Oh no, looks like it could be rendering. Rendering the adept or the guest vulnerable to the onslaught of the Vaudoons. Vibrating like a tuning fork under the drum beats, the subject saw herself double 1 minute and single the next. She had entered the zone of higher consciousness dominated by the principles of quantum or wave function. From time to time, the invading entity would stress its power of gravity on that left leg, a portal of entry, and send more axionic waves towards the brain and the entire organism. Darren described it as the rooting of the leg. The incoming waves were intoxicating and create a high and increased the perception of alternate realities or the psychedelic surreality, where a forward lean becomes a long fall across space. Her vibrating skull became one with the drum, and the singing and the beats were a metamorphosis of her own ear, and the vibrations came from inside her head. The loa and she were in a composite state with the voices and the drum beats. She was drowned in a sea of axionic waves. Her boundaries were confounded with that of this other dimension. And that was not an abstraction, a psychoid phenomena, an imaginal figment, by the encircling presence of the physical realm that has passed from weakly interacting to strongly interacting massive particles, so that she felt like she was encased in a cylinder or a well of sound. And that cylinder or well was the whole cosmos. There is nothing anywhere except this. There is no way out. Maya Deren was living in a Baudelarian correspondences, the communicating vases of the surrealist, the universe of Castañeda on the Mescalito, when the invading shadow matter overwhelmed her entire person, creating a paradoxical vision of light called by her white darkness. It was as if the shadow of dark matter has become luminescent, and the white darkness was moving through her like a swift rising tide. She was dealing with a tangible force, a physical power field that produces the rang of Osterreich, the rang of Osterreich, or a coercive magnetic might. It makes her say, "It is a great force which I cannot sustain or contain, which surely will burst my skin. It is too much, too bright, too white for me." She cried for relief, for mercy. It was like an orgasmic rapture. The shadow matter entity flooded up through her body, reaching her head and engulfed her. She was sucked down and exploded upward at once. She was totally possessed by Erzuli. In that state, sound was experienced as light. It was an audible light, invisible but very bright, that was scanning the void for substance to fix upon and to become upon that substance light. Some described similar phenomenon in a trance state during his initiation in Upper Volta, Burkina Faso. Mm. He experienced the unbroken wholeness of the universe, which reveals itself to be pan vitalism. He could feel that life was pulsating in everything around him and underneath him, even in small, even in the smallest speck of dirt. Sounds were blue or green, and colors were very loud. The dark matter field of the Vodun enwrapped Darren as if she was inside a deep down sunken well, and she was at the bottom of that field. Every molecule of her body and brain anguished to move out of that well, but she could not do so on her own choosing. Soon she was drawn up by the sound's power. Slowly she was lifted on the beam of shadow matter. It was like coming out of the bottom of the sea in a crescendo manner, faster, swifter, and higher and higher. The composite sound grew stronger, tighter, louder and louder, became a thundering clamor, a clanging bell, a deafening sound, and then suddenly surfaced. It was a new zone with air and light, a light similar to that reported by the victims of cardiac arrest, brought back to life by CPR. In that light, the world looked clearer. Darren saw everything at once: quantum ubiquity, instantaneous propagation. Like Schrodinger, she was the whole universe. In my view of the world, the physicist declares, I am in the east and in the west. I am below and I above. I am this whole world. All in all, this is an immediate knowledge of things without the mediation of eyes, nose, or other senses. She was looking at the essence of things, but soon those Platonic archetypes were modulated into meanings, became the knight, the peristyle, the Honsu Kanzo, the Hugan, and the bystanders. Darren, who never had a regular initiation or a simple lave tete, was possessed by the Vodun Erzuli 7 or 8 times. She was mounted once by the Loa Loco, and Azaka threatened her head a number of times. She was more attracted by the personality of the Vodou Gede, but she was never possessed by that entity. Once she was possessed by Erzuli in a very inopportune time, the period when the Loa was installed in a composite state with her was a complete blank in her memory. When she regained consciousness, about 4 hours had elapsed. She was informed that she was a very lucky woman, since Zuli herself had performed the complete drum ceremony she was in the process of accomplishing. Another adept of the Vodou alternate realities, Claude Planson, a Frenchman initiated as Hunsi in Haiti. His book Le Vaudou, published in Paris in 1987, is of great value as first-hand testimony of another Caucasian without the background used by scholars, physicians, and researchers to explain the manifestations of the crisis of possession. One of his dramatic possessions occurred at Saint de Saut de which saw the Vodou Pilgrimage Center. Where am I? The Vodou Pilgrimage Center. He had climbed near the top of the cascade at a height of about 12 meters when he was suddenly grabbed in the back of his neck by a magnetic hand that pushed him downward into the waters. He passed out with the forceful entry of the axionic force in his nuchal area. When he regained consciousness, he was in the water supported by other people such as the Mambo Mathilda Beauvoir. He did not experience any fear or injury. By his observations, Planson proved beyond any doubt that the experience of slavery and his mistreatment of blacks in America have nothing to do with the crisis of possession. It is a universal phenomenon experienced by all racial groups that come into contact with the axionic entities. In Paris in 1966, Planson and a group of Haitians presented to the Caucasian public authentic Vodou ceremonies for a period of 2 weeks. Planson and friends wanted the ceremonies to be just an artistic performance for the 200 to 300 spectators assembled under the large tent in the area of Paris called Ile de Puteux. To their amazement, there were episodes of possession every night among the Caucasian spectators. The Loa that possessed the white people could be easily identified, be it Ogu, Dambala, Azaka, etc. There was no place for the usual explanation of hysteria, neurosis, or slaves trying to regain their human value, or the reproduction of a learned behavior taught from infancy to adulthood. Among the possessed were a psychologist, an accountant, a mechanographer, and a student in architecture. They all lost consciousness under the onslaught of the shadow entities. It was a Bosel attack that overwhelms atheists, Catholics, and practicing Jews. The description of Adorcism given by the Caucasians was similar to that reported by Maggie, Allouds, and Deren. Out of the blue came a fainting sensation, a loss of equilibrium, and an attempt to regain one's own balance. And then there was that force, a magnetic force field that enwrapped the subject, taking possession of his whole body. There was that power that pressed upon the back of the neck. The hands became heavy, and the subject attempted to shake them to get rid of that sensation, described as having gloves made of lead. Up to that point, the individual was conscious and observing the transformations. His body was becoming fuzzy and fuzzier in a perception that reminds one of Maggie's invisible woman. Then came the sensation of falling into that empty space, the space of unconsciousness. During that time of obliteration of his semedo or gros by the axionic Vodun, the individual showed strength that goes beyond his ordinary capabilities. When the composite state dissipates, the subject has to get from the spectators an account of his behavior. The African Haitian alternate reality and that of Cuban Santeria share the same gestalt. Planson attended the voodoo service offered by an old and celebrated priestess of Santeria in Havana at the beginning of Fidel Castro's regime. In that visit to Cuba, he was accompanied by Matilda Beauvoir and other adepts, and his company was introduced to the Havanian mambo by some Cuban officials. The priestess greeted everyone with a handshake. It was a dual or composite handshake that sent a strong magnetic zap through the body of each visitor. They jumped as if they were put into contact with an electric current, and some of them rolled on the ground. Planson went through the same ordeal. A strong force seized his arm and gradually invaded his whole body until he was released. From the preceding assessment of the crisis of possession, we can caution researchers, physicians, physicists, philosophers, theologians, and anthropologists against empty statements of psychoid phenomena, imaginal realm, visionary rumors, hysteria, hysterical mimicry, psychological flight from an unbearable condition such as slavery or apartheid, or a schizoid search for self-worth. Furthermore, we don't even want to consider in this book the question of prestige. Man, what in the multiple syllables? The book, the question of prestige. Yo, digitation. Okay, let's take it one at a time. Digitation. Prestige. Yo, prestidigitation. Furthermore, we don't even want to consider in this book the question of prestidigitation, tricks, or pure quackery. Yo, what in the multiple syllables? How many syllables is that? Prestidigitation. Man, get that out of here, yo. Or pure quackery. This always enters into the differential diagnoses conducted by every physician facing every syndrome. We wanted to pursue our inquiry of the alternate reality after elimination of deception, crafty expedience, and artifice, and to zero in that non ordinary aspect of reality. It would be beneficial to any Western minded thinker or researcher to seek a personal brush with the alternate reality of shadow matter axionic forces before making any doctoral judgment. They should approach this parallel universe in the home for, as in a laboratory setting. They should touch the Vodun or be touched by them. They should avoid whimsical deductions from ivory tower research. Although the contact or approach of the Voduns can be very scary or dangerous, The researchers must be bold and courageous in their search for the many splendid thing called reality. Right. Da, 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 da. There we go.